Let's talk a little bit more about modeling for deformation, specifically deformation of the limbs, such as at the elbows and the knees. I have a few cylinders here, and they all look pretty similar, but you can see a difference in how they deform. You can see it basically gets a little bit better towards the right, but starting on the left here, let's just take a look at these two to begin with. You see the wireframes here, they look almost exactly the same. But the difference is that this one is actually made out of two pieces. And I mean, this approach isn't really something that is used a whole lot these days. But it does kind of show that using a primitive method like that can actually provide a better look than having it as one contiguous piece with just a single division there. But hopefully, you've got more polygons to use than this. And here we have another example, one with one division on one side, and then two on another, and two on both sides. Let's take a look at how this deforms. And you can see again, just having a single division just isn't enough. You lose a lot of volume in there. And here's on two divisions on the other side. You see it looks like it holds up pretty well actually. But then the outside, you just get this straight line, and it doesn't look too great either. And then here we have 2 and 3, and then just 3 all the way across. And here you can see that this one is actually probably the one that I would recommend if you only had a certain amount of polygons that you could use. In this case, maybe I would say between 2,000 and 2,000 and 4,000 polygons. Maybe this is the per character. This is the kind of solution that I would recommend for the limbs at the knees and the elbows. And you can see 2 on the inside usually works out pretty well, and having 3, that one in the center, just helps create a better elbow than this. Having 3 go all the way through, you might instinctively think that would be a better solution, but you can see it's pinching in here quite a bit, and that's just because these vertices need to go somewhere, and either you weight them evenly, creating this pinching effect, or you favor one side or the other, which may not look very good either. You'd have some more interpenetration in order for it to get this kind of a look, and also this is just fewer polygons, so something to keep in mind. I do think once you get over this threshold of polygons, I don't know, maybe 5,000 and above for your character, this becomes less of an issue, and the more polygons you're able to put in these areas, the more the rigger has to work with to create something that looks pretty good. Let's take another look at this generic female model again, and some of the deformations in action. We'll start down at the feet here. You can see that I've got enough geometry in here to accommodate the bending of the toes and the back of the ankle here. You can see that it does fall apart a little bit back here, but from a distance it works out just fine. The silhouette still reads pretty well. See the toe again. Usually, if something's bending that in one direction, 2 divisions is usually what you want as a minimum, I would say. Here you can see at the knee, the back of the knee. It's because there are 2 divisions there. It's maintaining volume pretty well. It doesn't look too awkward. And in the front of the knee, there's enough there that it still feels somewhat rigid. What you probably want to avoid in this case is to have things be too smoothed over of a curve. At that point, especially on like things like the knees and the elbows, it can start to feel like there isn't enough of a structure underneath. Like, there's no bone. So just trying to keep those angles when you can. And you can see up here on the hips that moving things around, it doesn't lose too much volume. It probably could be a little bit better than this. I mean, I'm not a rigger. This is just something I try to throw together myself. I'm sure a professional skinner could come up with something a little bit better than that. And in here, I do try to give enough divisions somewhat close together in here, so that when the legs are further apart, it doesn't look too strange. There's enough to accommodate going both this way and that way. On the outside, it doesn't look like it's losing too much either. On the arm, I like to put an extra division on the top of the wrist, just so that there's enough to work with when it goes into this kind of position. And on the shoulder is actually probably one of the hardest parts on the model to deal with. And I kind of think of it the same way as in here on the hips. But what you want is to be able to raise the arm and have it be pretty smooth in here. And that's a matter of having enough divisions to spread out when the arm is lifted. You can see how close together they are here, but then when it's at this position, how far apart these start to spread. So you can imagine if I didn't have that one division, or a division on either side of the corner of the armpit, it could get pretty rough. I mean, the distance would have been like from here to there without any geometry in between to smooth anything out. And you see a lot of wireframes of higher res models where the geometry is following the muscle flow, and it's curving in all sorts of directions, and that's probably not what you want to do for a low polygon model, especially one of this resolution. You simply do not have enough geometry to attempt those kinds of things, and sometimes trying to do that and not having enough in other areas to fully accommodate that can actually be detrimental to your deformations. So just keep in mind what you have to work with, and at this resolution, keeping your geometry evenly spaced and having divisions in key areas is gonna serve you a lot better as far as deformations go. And on a shoulder, you also want to have enough divisions to accommodate this kind of wide range of motion. Basically anything that you can do in real life, your model should be able to do to some degree. Particularly hard part is when the arm is up and it twists. You can see on some really low polygon models when there are animations with the arms over the head, that part can get really screwed up. So it's something you definitely want to pay a little bit extra attention to, not only in how you model it, but so it's a combination of how you model it, the joint placement, and how things are weighted, how the vertices are weighted during the skinning process. So, I mean, if you're doing this yourself, it might take you quite a few tries to find that magic combination that will work best for you. And if you're lucky enough to work with a rigger, even then you might have some back and forth to do, just between figuring out where putting the divisions works best for you and also works best for the rigger. On the neck is actually pretty simple. As long as you have enough divisions going around the neck, it's usually pretty straightforward. For this, I find that the complex part is more about balancing how you've got the vertices weighted in compared to some of the other joints that are around here, like the clavicle and the shoulder. Something that's actually kind of tricky to do is to have a character bend over pretty cleanly. You don't want the stomach to collapse in a weird way, and you don't want the back to curve, look like it's curving weird either. So let me try to get that in here. And a lot of times it's a combination of rotating a bunch of different things, different joints here to try to get that to work. But yeah, I mean, this is traditionally pretty difficult, at least for me, to get this kind of result. And I think in this case it looks pretty decent. But definitely something you might want to try out for yourself. And make sure that your character can achieve these kinds of positions. The face, at this resolution, you don't have a lot of geometry to work with, so you can't have all the fancy edge rings and edge loops that you might see on some high-res models. You do want to have the classic things, such as some rings going around the major features, like the eye and the mouth, and to a certain extent the nose too. But you can see here that the mouth works pretty well. It opens pretty cleanly. See on the corner of the mouth, you try to avoid having it come to just a single division. I kind of have two here. That just helps it so that when the mouth is open, it doesn't keep this corner here, which can look kind of weird sometimes if the mouth is open and it comes to a sharp corner. And even on the eyes here, I definitely do not have a ton of geometry, but I do have enough for a general blink, enough so that it's not, the eyeball isn't penetrating through it, and it does look like the eyes closed. And the one thing I do like to try to keep in mind is, or try to go for when I do my facial topology is, I like to have kind of an edge ring going along the jawline. I think it helps define the face a bit more than if you didn't have that. The chin and jaw is actually something that is that may require more geometry than you might think. At certain angles, you might see the faceting really become obvious, and if I had some polygons to spare, I might try to smooth these areas out, just so that when looking at certain angles, that it looks a little bit more rounded. Oh yeah, and I almost forgot the hand. This is actually a pretty difficult part to do as well. You see, at each knuckle I do have 3 on the outside, 3 divisions on the outside and 2 on the inside. Try to get it to bend in a way where, at least from a distance, it looks like it's maintaining the volume. I know I've got a lot of interpenetration here that doesn't look great from up close, but personally I'd rather have interpenetration than it losing volume. Same goes with all of these, and the knuckles are actually pretty difficult too. I've got 3 on the outside here and 2 on the inside again, so that when the hand closes, it still looks okay. It doesn't look too awkward there. And this especially helps for making fists, because that's, and especially in video games, that's probably what your character is going to be doing like a great deal of the time, is a fist. But other than that, is I think the biggest thing is just to remember to keep your geometry evenly spaced, because you want to have things, you want to have geometry there to help you out when the body is moving around. And part of this is just going to come from experience, doing models over and over again, seeing what works and what doesn't, and trying to keep that in mind for the thing you do next. Oh yeah, and another thing I forgot to mention is that you probably want to keep your figure as straight as you can. I mean, bind pose is a pretty big deal for riggers, and I mean, if you left it up to the rigger, they would want something like more of a Da Vinci pose, with the arms kind of splayed out and the legs kind of stretched out as well. But it's not ideal for the modeler to work in, because we are responsible for making it look good, and part of making it look good is to try to impart some kind of character and personality, and all of that is very hard to do when the character is splayed out in a very goofy position. So a lot of times what I end up doing is I'll model it the high res, the way I like it to look, and then once that's approved, I'll try to transpose that model into something that is better for rigging. In this case, this is actually a pretty good compromise. I found, is just to have legs pretty straight and the arms kind of at a 45-degree angle, and trying to keep the limbs straight and in line. You don't want the hands to be twisting out with the palm facing forward. Usually, most riggers would prefer it to be like this because it's a little bit more of a neutral pose. And I've actually gotten in trouble quite a few times with introducing too much curvature into the spine here. Even this here is probably, I'd probably be asked to remove some of this curvature if someone else was rigging it. For me, I think I got it to work okay, but usually you'd probably want to avoid having too much curvature in the spine. And the same thing goes with if your character has a tail or a ponytail or anything like that, or dangling chains or what have you. It's best to make those things straight, build them out straight. Like if there was a tail, I would just make it come straight out, and it would look ridiculous in the bind pose, but it'd be up to the animator at that point to pose the tail or the clothing or the hair, whatever it is. So you just have to keep in mind what's easier for the other people who are going to be working with your model, because it's a lot easier to pose a tail that was rigged when it was straight than to try to straighten out a tail that was modeled with a curve in it. And that's just the way it works. There is another limitation that game artists should be concerned with, and that is the optimization of the rig itself. There may be limits to the number of joints that you can use in a rig, and so you may find yourself building your low poly model in a way that takes this into account. And a common example of that is the hand. You can see in the original model here, I do have a joint for every knuckle and the finger, and I modeled it accordingly. But sometimes, depending on the rig, and maybe there aren't enough joints to go around, so a common place to cut joints out is in the hand itself. You can do something like this, where you have these just one joint chain for the knuckles, controlling all three fingers. Excuse the bad skinning here. I did this very quickly, just as an example. But you could do it this way, or the way they used to do it even further back was you'd have something like a mitten hand here, where the geometry was actually all together. I mean, back then you probably modeled this hand differently too. But again, this is just an example I did really quickly, just to show that the differences between how you might have to adapt your modeling to fit the rig. In this case, this works fine, keeping this essentially the same hand model and just having a different number of joints in here. But there are other occasions where knowing what the rigger intends to do later on down the line can affect the way you model it. I'd say that this kind of thing is getting more rare because technology is improving, the hardware that people play games on is improving, but for art for real-time usage will always have restrictions that cinematic productions don't have to worry about. If you look in Maya, there's all these kind of deformers, and not even taking into account solutions that people come up with, proprietary solutions. This is just stuff that Maya has, things like lattices, clusters, blend shapes, corrective blend shapes, having extra joints that counter rotate, all these things that can help fix and improve deformations are available within Maya, but very few of these techniques are suitable for real time. Uh, just pointing this out because there are a lot of these kinds of things that you can't rely on in game. So that's why you want to make sure that your geometry is very rigging friendly, because in a lot of cases that may be all that the rigger has to work with in order to get good deformations. Rigs and animation concerns are actually a huge limiting factor in games. That's why you don't often see really crazy creatures with like millions of limbs or like really elaborate clothing in decorations, because that's the kind of stuff is just really tough to pull off in a real-time situation, and especially with the time constraints that a lot of characters are built in. The pipeline, it's so fast and there's so much work to do that devoting a lot of effort on one character is not always possible, and the payoff is probably not worth it in the end if you did try it. And even with human characters in games, they within a game they tend to look pretty similar, and that's because a lot of games, they'll come up with one rig and they'll try to fit as many characters on it as possible so that they can reuse the animations. And that's kind of why a lot of the models in games that don't do it as successfully is, all the characters can kind of look the same, because when you model a character, you have to fit on that rig for the most part. So it affects your proportions. It affects what kind of extra stuff you can put on, because if this rig never had joints for shoulder pads or something, and you modeled in a shoulder pad, then what's going to happen? That means that the rigger actually has to put an extra joint. The animator has to animate it. It's just a cascading effect. So sometimes the designs have to be compromised in a game production. And that's just one of the biggest challenges of working in this field. Not only do you have to make a good looking character, but you're dealing with all sorts of technical and time limitations. And it's at this point where you have to get a little creative in order to make sure the model can still get through and look good in the end. And that's just part of your responsibility as a character artist. Just in understanding the limitations is the first step towards doing that. These kinds of things aren't something that you have to be too concerned with when you're making a model for yourself in your own portfolio, but demonstrating an awareness for decent topology, game-ready UVs and things like that, they're always very valuable, because when you show that in your portfolio, it shows that you are aware of these things and are willing to adapt and maybe even compromise your art a little bit in order to fit the game production, and strive for better results in game. And because that's, at the end of the day, that's the most important thing, making sure things work in the game and that it doesn't compromise how fun the game is, or how it plays, or the performance of it.